tile was cold beneath me, colder than I ever remembered it being. Not the kind of cold that just touches your skin, but the kind that seeps through you, like it's reaching for your bones. I remember the way the light flickered above me, that ugly yellow bathroom bulb buzzing faintly like it had grown tired too. My nightgown was bunched around my knees, one slipper still on the other, God knows where. And my arm, well, I couldn't move it without crying out. But I didn't cry out. I didn't scream. I just lay there waiting for something that didn't come. It had been the simplest thing. I was rinsing out a washcloth. Something silly, small, the kind of moment no one ever thinks will become a turning point. My foot slipped on a bit of water and then gravity did the rest. My hip hit the tile first, then my shoulder. I remember the sound more than the pain. A dull, wet thud, like a sack of flour dropped too hard. For a moment I couldn't breathe, not from the injury, but from the shock. I just kept thinking, did this really just happen? And then I waited. I waited because I assumed the phone would ring. It always did, didn't it? They call once a day, or every other, or at least when they need something. But that day the silence was louder than the thud. I watched the tiny crack in the ceiling. I counted the faded tiles. I measured time by the way the light moved across the floor. I didn't scream because I didn't want the neighbors to hear. I didn't want the shame of it. Imagine an old woman crumpled on the floor, yelling for help like a child lost in a store. No, I've never been that kind of woman. I've always cleaned up after myself, always waited quietly, always made it easy for others. By evening, the bathroom light looked different, dimmer. The pain in my hip grew sharper, like it was sharpening itself on my nerves. My mouth was dry and I kept licking my lips, hoping some comfort would come of it. Still, I waited. Every creak in the walls made my heart skip. I imagined my daughter coming in her voice, calling out Mom. I imagined the beep of a message notification, the jingle of a ringtone. But there was nothing. There's something terrifying about being forgotten, not in the grand sense of memory, but in the intimate, ordinary ways, not being remembered in the hour they usually call, not being missed when you don't answer. That first day I told myself they were busy. Meetings, errands, kids. I gave them excuses even as I couldn't move. I remember thinking, so this is how it ends, not with drama or noise, but quietly with the hum of a light and the chill of ceramic pressing into your skin. I thought about all the times I padded into that same bathroom to scrub little hands, to wipe little tears, to wash out grass stains from tiny jeans. I used to be so needed in that room. Now I was just another thing on the floor no one had picked up. At some point that first night, I started hallucinating little things, a tap at the window, a voice down the hall, but it was all the house settling, mocking me with its usual nighttime routine, and I realized how easily the world moves on when you're still. It doesn't stop for you. It doesn't check in. It just continues. The second morning was worse. I hadn't slept. My body was stiff. My shoulder screamed if I tried to shift. I started to cry, not loudly, just little silent tears that warmed my temples as they slid down. I wasn't crying because of the pain. I was crying because I understood. I finally understood that I could disappear right there in the middle of my own home, and it might be days before anyone noticed. And I hated that realization, not because it made me angry, but because it made me feel stupid. Stupid for all the dinners I packed into Tupperware, all the phone calls I answered at midnight, all the birthdays I planned when no one ever asked what I wanted. I thought love was a safety net. I thought giving made you unforgettable. But love doesn't keep you off the floor, and giving doesn't guarantee remembering. I thought I'd earned at least a phone call. On the third morning, I stopped expecting the phone to ring. That was the shift. I stopped waiting for the outside world to remember me. I began talking to the crack in the ceiling instead, whispering little jokes to it, as if we'd become old friends. I started planning how I might crawl, not if how. I traced a path with my eyes, measuring distances between baseboards, imagining how many pushes it would take to get to the hallway. And still no one called. The clock above the sink ticked on. Not once did it pause. Back when they were little, I never missed a sound. I could hear a sniffle through a closed door. I could tell from the way their shoes hit the floor if they were sad, tired, or trying to hide something. I was the watcher, the silent sentinel, the woman who slept light, just in case someone cried out in the night. I used to joke that my ears were tuned to their frequency, that even in sleep I could catch a whisper of distress. And it was true. I lived with one ear in their world and one hand always reaching. There were years when it felt like I was made of movement. From morning until well after the stars came out, I was in motion, packing lunches, tying shoelaces, wiping away tears, clapping at school plays, cooking dinners, folding laundry that smelled like grass and crayon wax, and little lives being built. I never asked for thanks. I didn't think I needed it. Their joy was my reward. Their health, their growth, their dreams, that was enough. It's strange how that version of me feels like someone else now. Like an old film reel I've watched too many times until the colors have dulled and the faces start to flicker. She was strong, that woman. She carried bags of groceries in each hand, a child on her hip, and a grocery list in her head. She remembered birthdays, favorite snacks, the name of every teacher, every classmate, every small crisis that felt like the end of the world. I was the first person they ran to when they were scared. When the world was too loud, too cruel, they came home, and I held them in arms that never complained. And now, I am a thought they sometimes have when they see an old photo or pass a store we used to visit. Now I am a name saved in their phone just under Mom, maybe still with a heart emoji from years ago, but buried beneath endless messages from bosses, coworkers, and school groups. I wonder if my name flashes up, and they swipe it away. I'll call her later. I'm in a rush. She's probably fine. I used to know they were fine. I checked. I peeked into bedrooms, pressed my lips to warm foreheads, noticed half-eaten meals and shifting moods. I didn't wait for them to say, "I'm not okay." I just knew. I was tuned in. Now I'm a mystery to them. A quiet voice on the phone. A woman who says, "Everything's good" when asked, because I don't want to be a burden. Because I know they have enough. Because I've trained them not to worry. But that morning on the floor, bruised and aching, I realized I had watched everyone else. But no one was watching me. I thought of the dozens of times they had come home with colds, scrapes, fears, and I had dropped everything to care. I never thought twice. I didn't ask for an appointment or schedule a slot. I just showed up, every time. That was the difference. I showed up. That's the pain. People don't talk about the loneliness that grows from your own kindness. When you've spent a lifetime being dependable, people stop checking if you need anything. They assume you're always okay. They don't realize you've grown tired of being strong in silence. They don't see that your hands shake now when you reach for the kettle. They don't know that you wince when you sit, when you stand, when you lie down, because you've hidden it too well. I used to think love meant shielding them from my pain, but now I see I trained them not to look for it. I can't blame them entirely. I did it with pride. I swallowed pain and put on smiles like armor. I thought I was teaching them strength, but maybe I was teaching them to ignore it. Maybe I made love look too easy, too quiet, too invisible. So when I didn't answer the phone that week, when I didn't send my usual text or check in with a reminder or a recipe, I suppose it didn't register. No alarm bells, no sudden visits, no worried calls, just silence. Because I had made myself forgettable in my effort to be unbothersome. And in a cruel way, that's what I had wanted to be: low maintenance, to be the mom who never guilt-tripped or demanded attention. I didn't want to be a weight on their lives, but now I realize how heartbreaking it is to become so weightless that no one feels your absence. I think about mothers in movies, how they're always crying or yelling or chasing after their children with overbearing love. That was never me. I thought quiet love was enough. I thought if I just kept showing up, they'd remember to do the same. But love, I've learned, has to be seen to be felt, and I made myself invisible too many times. That morning on the second day, I let go of something inside me. I let go of the fantasy that they would always know when I needed them, that they would sense it through some magical thread of maternal connection. I let go of the idea that I would be rescued. Instead, I began to turn inward, not bitter, not angry, just sober, like waking up from a long dream where I had believed I mattered more than I did, where I thought my sacrifices were unforgettable, but they weren't. They were convenient, and now they were background noise. The third day, I stared at the phone like it was some ancient relic, something powerful once, but now useless. I remembered when it rang constantly, when the house was loud with noise, with plans, with people asking Mom, "Where are my shoes? Can you pick me up? Did you wash my uniform?" Back then, I could barely hear myself think. I used to laugh and say, one day this house will be quiet, and I won't know what to do with myself. I said it like it was a blessing, but now the silence feels like a punishment. The phone sat on the side table in the hallway, not far, but from the bathroom floor it felt like a continent away. I could see it in my mind perfectly, its chipped corner, the way the screen lights up even when no one's calling. It used to be my lifeline, a direct line to my children, my friends, my world. But now I waited for it to ring, the way you wait for a miracle. Quietly, powerlessly. There's a certain kind of pain in realizing that no one is expecting to hear from you, that your absence doesn't cause ripples in their day. I hadn't texted in 2 days. I hadn't commented on their silly social media posts or forwarded them articles or recipes they'd never read. I hadn't sent my usual "How are you?" message, and still nothing. No call, no knock, no "Are you okay?" I told myself not to cry again, but tears don't always ask for permission. They come like old friends when you've held too much for too long. My breath caught in my throat, not from sobbing, but from the sheer ache of being so unmissed. I wanted to be gracious. I wanted to believe the best of them. But grace is hard to hold when your arm is going numb, and your hip is bruised, and your heart is heavier than your body. And still the phone sat there indifferent. I thought back to all the times I called them, not just for emergencies, but for comfort. Just to hear their voices, just to say I made your favorite soup today. I was thinking of you, little lifelines, little proof that I was still tethered to something. Now the silence was suffocating. The quiet didn't feel peaceful, it felt like abandonment. And it wasn't just the silence of the phone, it was the silence in my memory. The silence that followed all the sacrifices I made that no one ever acknowledged. The countless small moments I erased myself for others, the dinners I skipped, the new shoes I didn't buy, the vacations I postponed, the dreams I shelved. Not once did anyone say, "That must have been hard." They just accepted it, expected it, assumed that mothers are built to give endlessly. But even wells run dry. Lying there, I began to see everything differently. I began to feel the shape of the absence I had created around myself by being too agreeable, too quiet, too selfless. I thought I was modeling love, but perhaps I was only teaching them to look past me. I wondered if I'd be missed more if I were louder, if I had yelled more, demanded, made scenes. Would they have called then? Would they have noticed a gap where my noise used to be? But that's never who I was. I was the calm in the storm, the one who stayed up when everyone else fell apart. And now I lay still wondering if I had loved them, in a way that made me invisible. Somewhere in those 3 days, time stopped mattering. The sky outside brightened, dimmed, brightened again. I tracked the light on the tiles like it was the only rhythm left. My body ached differently now, not sharply, just persistently, like a quiet drumbeat reminding me I was still here, still waiting. But for what? The phone had become a symbol of expectation, of hope, of the love I had poured into others, returning in a simple ring, a simple voice asking, "Are you okay?" When it didn't ring, something shifted in me. The hope didn't die, it just settled, like dust, like snow, a quiet surrender, not bitterness, not despair, just an understanding. I was alone, and they didn't know. And if they didn't know, it meant I hadn't mattered the way I thought I did. Not anymore. Not in the way that prompts urgency or worry or instinct. That realization, soft as it came, landed harder than any fall ever could. Still, I watched the hallway. I imagined the phone lighting up. I pictured my daughter's name, my son's voice, anything. But I also stopped expecting. That was the difference. That was the moment. I stopped waiting for them to call. It wasn't until the quiet settled into my bones that I began to think of all the little things I had never said, the things I tucked away because I thought they didn't matter, or because I didn't want to be dramatic, or because I was too proud to admit I needed something as simple as kindness. I had spent so many years making their lives easier, smoother, lighter. But somewhere along the way, I made myself disappear. I never said how much it hurt when they forgot my birthday the first time. I laughed it off, said, "Oh well, I'm too old for cake anyway," and even ordered takeout so they wouldn't feel guilty. But that night I cried quietly into my pillow, wondering how the one day meant to be mine could vanish without a trace. I never told them how I spent that morning holding the card I'd written for myself. A silly thing, just a note in my diary that read, "You did your best. You tried your hardest. You were a good mother," because no one else had said it in years. I never said how I sometimes left the porch light on hoping someone would come by. I told myself it was habit, but deep down it was hope. Hope that someone might stop in for no reason. That someone might remember I existed in more than just obligation. I never told them how loud the evenings became after they all moved out, not from sound, but from the absence of it. The way the house seemed to echo with memories of footsteps down the hall doors, slamming, laughter spilling from the kitchen. I filled the silence with television, with the radio, with podcasts I didn't care about. Anything to make it feel like I was still part of something alive. And I certainly never told them how I sometimes rehearsed what I'd say if they asked Mom, "Are you lonely?" Because the truth would crack open something inside me that I didn't think I could hold together again. I practiced the soft, easy lie, "No, I'm fine. I've got my books, my shows, my garden." And every time I said it out loud to myself, I hated how convincing I sounded. But on that bathroom floor, all of those words flooded back. Every "I'm fine" I had ever muttered suddenly felt like a betrayal to myself, because I wasn't fine. I hadn't been for years. And the saddest part, I'd made sure no one could see it. That morning, day 3, I think I closed my eyes and pictured their faces, my daughter laughing on her wedding day, my son falling asleep in the back seat after soccer practice. I raised them on love so thick you could wrap yourself in it like a blanket. I thought that would be enough to sustain them, to tether them back to me. But love that never asks for anything in return can start to look invisible. And that's what I had become, a soft presence that didn't ask, didn't cry, didn't say, please. It's not that they're cruel, it's that they've learned to live without needing me. And I suppose that was the goal all along. Isn't that what we tell ourselves as mothers? That if we've done our job right, they won't need us anymore. But no one tells you how lonely that success feels. I thought about calling them, about dragging myself down the hallway, lifting the phone with trembling fingers and whispering, I need help. But even then I hesitated, not because of pride, but because I wasn't sure they would understand the weight of it, that it wouldn't just be about a fall in the bathroom. It would be about years of unspoken need, of gentle invisibility of love given without echo. And what if they didn't come? What if they answered with worry in their voices, but not in their actions? What if they promised to stop by and never did? I didn't think I could survive that kind of disappointment. Not now, not when I was already cracked open. So I stayed quiet, again. But something in me shifted. I began to catalog everything I'd swallowed, every small pain, every forgotten moment, every lonely meal, every missed call, every soft ache I had turned into silence. Not to hold a grudge, but to finally acknowledge that I had carried more than I admitted, even to myself. And I began to think, maybe it wasn't too late to stop pretending. Maybe I didn't have to keep being the strong one. Maybe I could let the world see the cost of all the things I never said. Because if I kept quiet, if I kept lying with smiles and don't worry about me, how would they ever know? I used to know the rhythm of their footsteps. That's something no one tells you about motherhood, how your body becomes a kind of instrument, finely tuned to the music of your children's lives. I could tell who was walking down the hall just by the pace, the pressure, the shuffle. I knew when they were hungry. I knew when they were lying. I knew when they were scared, even before they spoke. And now I can't remember the last time I heard them walk through my door. I sat there on that floor somewhere between memories and pain, and I thought about all the things I had raised, not just children. I raised meals, mornings, holidays, lullabies. I raised traditions that they now carry on in other homes around other tables without ever inviting me. I raised voices that once called out for me in the night and now go silent for days. There are photos on the wall that still show the shape of my love, birthdays with icing on noses, school projects we worked on together, a beach trip where I held up the umbrella all day so they wouldn't burn. I look at those pictures now and wonder what I was building. What did I think it would become? They say love is unconditional, but I've started to wonder, should it be invisible? I raised them to stand tall, to speak their minds, to chase their lives. But I never taught them how to turn around and look back. I didn't teach them to check on the woman who packed their bags, watched their games, whispered encouragement when they didn't believe in themselves. Maybe I thought they'd remember on their own. Maybe I believed memory was enough to anchor love. But memory fades when it's not fed. And I fed everyone but myself. I raised their sense of safety with the food I put on the table. I raised their self-worth with the way I applauded every small victory. I raised their dreams by staying up late, helping with essays, fixing costumes, pretending I wasn't tired. I poured myself into their worlds like water in a garden. I never asked if they'd water me back. And when I fell, when I truly needed to be seen, it didn't even register. I wonder if they'd be shocked to know how long I waited, how long I lay there. Would they feel guilt? Pity? Would they even believe it? I can hear the surprise in their voices already. Why didn't you call? Why didn't you say something? But that's the thing. I've said everything without saying a word for decades. I showed up. That was my love language. That was my voice. I thought about the scraped knees. I kissed the fevers I sat beside. I thought about the times I waited outside in the rain for them to come out of practice shivering in my coat, pretending it was fine. I never asked them to notice. I thought love meant not keeping score. But sometimes in the quiet, I realized that keeping score might have been the only way to prove I was even playing the game. Because when you give without asking, people learn not to offer. When you don't speak, they forget to listen. When you disappear into service, they don't see you vanish. They just assume you were never there. It's strange how much of myself I see in them. The way my daughter carries herself, the way my son sighs when he's overwhelmed. I pass down pieces of me, but I didn't pass down the parts that say, care for others the way they cared for you. That's on me. I raised them to be strong. I didn't raise them to look back. And now lying there bruised and stiff, I kept thinking if I had taught them to love, like I did, to notice the small things, to listen between the lines, maybe they would have felt it, the absence, the ache, the quiet cry that never reached their ears. Maybe love doesn't just need to be given. Maybe it needs to be taught how to return. But I never thought I'd have to teach them to love me. By the third night, I had managed to pull myself just far enough to see the kitchen light, that soft, humming glow that spilled across the floor like a memory. It looked warm, distant, familiar. I'd always loved that light. I kept it on at night like a lighthouse just in case someone came home late or got up thirsty or needed comfort. And now it was the only thing still shining in my world. It felt strange watching it from the ground, like staring at a photograph of a life I used to live. The table was there with its worn corners and the one leg that wobbled. I could see the fridge still covered in old magnets, faded drawings, a yellowed grocery list I hadn't updated in weeks. And suddenly, all I could think about was food. Not in the hungry sense, but in the memory sense. I thought of the thousands of meals I'd made, the packed lunches with napkin notes, the casseroles for when they were sick, the cakes with uneven frosting. I remembered how they used to barge into the kitchen asking what's for dinner, as if dinner were a natural law, not something that required effort, time, or love. I remembered how I used to hum while I cooked, little songs, old lullabies, the same ones I sang when rocking them to sleep. I haven't hummed in a long time, not since the house went quiet. Now crawling toward the kitchen, I wasn't looking for food. I was looking for a feeling, something that reminded me I was still alive, that I still belonged here, that this house was still mine. It's funny how even after all that time on the floor, I didn't worry about the bruises, or the way my fingers shook, or the dizziness when I moved. What I worried about was the fridge. I prayed I had something easy to reach, something soft, something gentle, because I didn't want to fall again trying to cook. Even at my lowest, I was still planning around others, still thinking of how not to cause trouble, still trying to be neat about my suffering. That's what being a mother does to you. It rewires the way you hurt. You learn to do it quietly, efficiently, out of the way. I reached the fridge door after what felt like an hour of dragging and resting, dragging and resting. My legs were numb, my sides screamed with every movement. But I made it. I held on to the handle like it was a lifeline, and when I opened it, the soft light washed over me. It was almost holy. The inside was sparse. Leftovers I couldn't even remember making. A carton of eggs, a half-full bottle of milk, and some grapes slowly turning. I remember the smell. It wasn't bad, just old, tired, like me. I didn't take anything right away. I just sat there, leaning against the fridge, letting the cold air brush over my face. It reminded me of late nights, waiting up when someone was sick or out too late or heartbroken. I'd often sit there then too, sipping cold tea or eating standing up, keeping my worry quiet. I thought of those nights, and I missed them, not because they were easy, but because they gave me purpose. I knew where I was needed. Now no one needed me to sit up. No one even knew I had fallen. Eventually, I found a container of soup I'd made a few days before, something I'd cooked out of habit, though no one had come to visit. I remembered hoping someone might drop by, that I could ladle out bowls and ask questions and laugh at nothing in particular. But no one came. The soup went untouched, and now here I was, clinging to it like a relic. I drank straight from the container, too tired to find a spoon. It was cold, but it tasted like something I recognized, like myself. And I cried again, not because I was sad, but because that soup reminded me I am still here. I still make things. I still matter, even if no one else sees it. The fridge light stayed on while I sat in the middle of the kitchen floor, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel entirely alone. Because in that quiet, with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of my breath, I remembered who I used to be. Not just the giver, but the woman who danced in this kitchen when no one was looking, who used to twirl to old songs on the radio, who laughed at her own jokes and lit candles for no reason. She was still in there, buried beneath the pain, the loneliness, the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that light in the fridge wasn't the only thing still glowing. Time became strange during those 3 days. It stopped following hours and minutes. It stopped asking for permission to pass. It just flowed, sometimes slow, like honey left out in the cold, sometimes fast, like a gust of wind that blew through and took something with it. I didn't know what day it was. I only knew light and dark, silence and sound, hunger and stillness. I listened to everything, the tick of the wall clock, the creak of the stairs I hadn't climbed in weeks, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. And the sound I longed for, the ring of the phone, never came, not once. Not a beep, not a buzz, not even the faintest signal that someone was thinking of me. You would think I'd be angry by now, that I'd be filled with rage, with disappointment, with hurt so sharp I couldn't breathe. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter than that. Like watching a ship you built yourself drift further and further out to sea, too far to call back. It wasn't the kind of pain that screamed. It was the kind that folded itself up and sat with you in silence. I counted the days in my body, the ache in my shoulder, the stiffness in my knees, the bruises blooming like dark flowers on my skin. I watched the window above the sink, the way the light changed, how the wind brushed the curtain just slightly. I noticed everything, because there was no one left to notice me. At one point, I caught my reflection in the oven door, a smudge of a woman, slumped and small, hair askew, eyes sunken. I didn't recognize her. Or maybe I did, and I'd just been pretending not to. She looked like someone who had been waiting too long for something she once believed was guaranteed love attention, maybe just a little care. She looked like someone who had built her life around others and was now left with the silence of their absence. And yet, I still didn't pick up the phone. Not because I couldn't. I had managed to pull myself far enough. I had water. I had soup. I even found a blanket. I could have made the call. But I didn't. Because deep down, I needed to know. I needed to see how long it would take. If it would happen at all. If the people I raised, the ones I once fed with my hands and rocked to sleep with tired arms, would think to ask, "Where's Mom?" That became the hardest part. Not the fall, not the bruises, but the waiting. 3 days, 72 hours, thousands of seconds. And in all that time, not one person reached for me. I had become something forgotten, like a sweater at the back of a closet, useful once, perhaps even beloved, but now out of sight, out of thought. I remembered the stories I used to tell them, how when they were little I never let them sleep with fear. If they had a bad dream, I would lay beside them, even on the hard floor, whispering lullabies until their breath evened out. I told them they were safe, that no matter what, Mommy was always close. I wonder if they remember that now. I wonder if they ever think about how hard I loved them. Because it wasn't loud, that love. It didn't come with rules or lectures. It came with extra blankets, late-night sandwiches, quiet rides home after hard days. It came with never asking for anything in return. But love like that can become invisible, expected, forgotten. The second night I spent on the floor, I started whispering to the house, to the walls, to the memories that lived here longer than I had. I said their names softly like prayers, not out of blame, out of longing. I just wanted them to feel something wherever they were. I wanted the air to carry my voice. I wanted them to pause and wonder, is Mom okay? But I knew better. People get busy, life gets loud, and quiet women like me get lost in the shuffle. So I wrapped myself in that old blanket, pulled it around my shoulders, and sat beneath the kitchen light like it was a fire in a cave, waiting, watching, hoping the world would remember me. By the time I realized what day it was, the sun had already begun to set. Again, the third evening. And with it came a strange clarity, one that arrived not like a storm, but like a slow tide creeping over sand. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I was simply awake, finally, painfully, awake to something I had never wanted to admit, that love, when unreciprocated long enough, turns into loneliness wearing a disguise. I sat on the kitchen floor with my knees tucked to my chest, the blanket draped around me, and the light from the window casting long shadows across the room. I looked at the phone again, and this time I didn't feel desperation. I felt a kind of sad acceptance, like finally seeing the shape of a thing you've been avoiding for years. My children hadn't forgotten me because they were bad. They'd forgotten me because they believed I didn't need remembering, because I made it easy for them to believe that. I answered every call with cheer, even when my heart ached. I brushed off missed visits with, "Don't worry, I understand." I said I'm fine so many times it started to become the truth in their minds. And I suppose that was my mistake. There's a price to being the strong one. People stop checking if you're okay. They lean into your steadiness. They count on your silence as proof that nothing is wrong. But strength doesn't mean invincible, and silence doesn't mean content. That evening I thought about every time they had asked for help, and I had shown up. The rushed drives to babysit, the last-minute errands, the late-night talks when their hearts were broken. I never hesitated. I never made them wait. I was their constant, their safety net, their soft landing. But when I fell, there was no one to catch me. I started to see it all clearly, how my love had been taken for granted, not out of cruelty, but out of familiarity. I had made myself background music, always playing, always there, easily tuned out. They never asked how the song kept playing. They never thought it might stop. When you become the person who never asks for anything, people forget that you still need. It wasn't their fault entirely. They had lives, careers, families of their own. I had raised them to be independent, to move forward, to pursue happiness. But I had also failed to teach them the other side of love, the part that circles back, that checks in, that slows down enough to notice when someone is fading. and I had faded. Slowly, almost gracefully, like the way a photograph dulls in the sun, like the way a once-loved chair gets pushed further into the corner. I had become part of the scenery. So when they didn't call, it wasn't because they didn't love me. It was because they thought I didn't need them to. And that thought, that tragic misunderstanding, settled over me like fog. It didn't crush me. It wrapped me in something quieter, something final. I had trained them too well to forget me. The truth landed with a kind of softness. There was no flash of bitterness, just a quiet mourning for the woman I used to be, the one who thought unconditional love would be noticed, remembered, repaid. But real life doesn't work that way. People remember what interrupts them. People notice noise. And I had built my motherhood on silence. Still, I didn't reach for the phone. I sat with that truth, held it, let it warm and sting all at once. And then, like something unspoken breaking loose inside me, I whispered aloud to the empty room, "I'm not fine." The words hung there like a confession too late to matter, but it felt good to say it without pretending, without smiling, without following it up with a joke or reassurance. Just, "I'm not fine." And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't try to fix it. The calendar on the wall still held last month's page. I hadn't bothered flipping it, not because I'd forgotten, but because the days all felt the same. Empty squares, boxes filled with appointments that never happened, phone calls that were never made, a dinner plan with my daughter that she rescheduled twice and then never mentioned again. I'd circled it in ink, a little heart beside her name. It stayed there, untouched like a child's drawing stuck to a refrigerator long after its meaning has faded. Dust clung to the edges of each page like a quiet accusation. I stood there finally on my feet, one hand on the counter, my legs trembling beneath me. I stared at that calendar and felt an ache so old it no longer startled me. Not sharp like the fall, but dull familiar, like a bruise that never fully fades. That wall had once been a center of life, filled with schedules, chore charts, countdowns to vacations. I used to write little notes to myself on it, tucked between their activities: pick up milk, don't forget to breathe. You're doing okay. It had been my lifeline, proof that the days had shape, that I had somewhere to be, someone to be needed by. Now it was just paper and dust. I traced the dates with my eyes. Not one of them had a visit. Not one had a check-in. Just empty space. I thought absurdly that I could pencil in something, "Now maybe write, ask for help, or remember who you were." But I didn't. I just stood there, leaning on my good leg, breathing shallowly, and letting the silence say what no one else had. It's a strange thing being forgotten gradually. It doesn't happen in one sharp moment. It's not a slammed door or a cruel word. It's slower than that, softer. It's when the texts grow shorter, the visits less frequent, the conversations more shallow, until one day you realize you've been replaced by updates in a group chat or half-hearted emojis under your comments. They love me, I know that, but love doesn't always mean presence. Love doesn't always mean effort. Sometimes love just means memory, and memories fade. I thought back to the times they used to leave me little notes, crayon drawings, scribbled thank yous, sloppy kisses on cheeks, and then I thought of the years in between, how they became too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed to reach back toward me. I never asked them to. I said, "Live your life. I'm so proud." And I meant it. I still do. But pride is a strange companion when it's all you have to keep you warm at night. The truth is, I stopped flipping the calendar because it hurt to see time move forward without me in it. Because when you're no longer part of someone's rhythm, time becomes a stranger. You exist beside it, not within it. I sat down again slowly, carefully, back on the old kitchen chair with the worn cushion, the one no one ever sits in anymore. And I looked around at the house, the clean counters, the stacked plates, the photos on the wall, and I realized I had kept everything in place, hoping they might come back, hoping that one day someone would walk in, notice the soup on the stove, the calendar with their name on it, and feel something, remember something. But houses don't hold people, not the way hearts do, and mine had been stretched too thin for too long. There's something almost cruel about how quietly a mother disappears, not all at once, but piece by piece. They stop asking for your opinion, then they stop asking how you are, then they stop asking anything at all, and still you smile, still you offer, still you wait, because you remember everything. I thought then about all the stories I never told them, the heartbreaks I hid, the sacrifices I made that they'll never know, not because I wanted to be a martyr, but because I thought that was love. I thought that's what mothers did. But maybe they needed to hear those stories. Maybe I did them no favors by swallowing my pain. Maybe all they saw was ease because I hid the cost. Maybe had I shown them how lonely it could be, how heavy unconditional love becomes when no one checks to see how you're carrying it, they might have learned to carry some of it with me. But I didn't. I kept smiling, kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm fine." And now the calendar was blank, and no one had turned the page but me. I used to whisper to myself that I didn't blame them, that they were busy, that they had their lives, that forgetting a call or a visit didn't mean they didn't love me. I said it so often it became my lullaby, the song I used to hush the ache. I don't blame them. I don't blame them. And for the longest time I believed it. But now, after 3 days of silence and pain and crawling from tile to table to chair, I began to wonder. Not with rage, no, I'm too tired for rage, but with a kind of quiet reckoning, a soft-edged question that hummed beneath my breath, should I have? I raised them to be strong, to be independent, to not need me. That was the goal, wasn't it? To give them wings, to make myself a safe place they could fly from, knowing they could always return. But maybe I forgot to teach them that the nest grows old, that the mother bird still feels cold, that safety isn't just something you leave behind, it's something you visit, you maintain, you water like a garden. I can't blame them entirely. The truth is, I made myself unnecessary. I took pride in not needing help. I didn't want to burden them, so I never let them see the weight I carried. I let them believe I was made of steel, not skin, that I was a lamp always glowing in the corner, no matter how dark the night. But I'm not a lamp. I'm a woman, and this body of mine breaks. This heart grows tired. This soul, though strong, has bruises too deep for the eye. I thought back to a moment not so long ago when I'd hinted to my daughter gently that I had been feeling dizzy more often. Her response was loving, but distracted. Something like, "Oh, Mom, you need to drink more water." And then the conversation moved on, and I let it, because I didn't want her to worry, because I didn't want her to think I was becoming a problem. But what is a problem, really? Isn't it just another word for someone who needs care? That's what I never allowed myself to be, a problem. And now I'm reaping what I sowed, an image of myself that was so competent, so capable, that no one thought to check if I still needed holding. I sat there that evening and thought about how many times I'd downplayed my needs, not just physical, emotional too. The loneliness, the sadness, the aching for conversation that didn't revolve around updates or quick replies or "I'll call you back." I missed real listening. I missed being asked questions. I missed being seen. And maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have sat them down one day and spoken the truth plainly. I'm not as okay as I seem. I still need you. Not every day, not forever, but sometimes. But instead I smiled, I nodded, I made it easy. So no, I don't blame them fully, but I don't absolve them anymore either. Because love, even unconditional love, has a mirror. It sees, it hears, it notices. And if they didn't notice I was gone for 3 whole days, if the woman who gave them life, who wiped their tears, who stayed up sewing costumes and mending mistakes could vanish and not be missed, then something is broken, not just in me, but in them too. I wiped the counter slowly that night out of habit. Even in pain, I needed the house to be clean. I stood under the kitchen light and thought, this is what I've become, a ghost who tidies. I wanted to be mad. I wanted to scream. But instead, I poured myself a glass of water, swallowed slowly and whispered, I raised them well. But maybe I raised them wrong. It's a thought that clings, not like guilt, but like truth that's been waiting to be spoken. I don't know how long I stood at the sink before I finally drank. My hands trembled as I held the glass, and the coldness of the water shocked my teeth, rattled something inside me. It tasted metallic, maybe from the faucet, maybe from the fall, but it was real, and I swallowed slowly, as if proving something to myself, that I could still move, that I was still here, that I didn't need anyone to hand me that glass. And yet I couldn't help but think how nice it would have been, just once, to have someone pour the water for me, to have someone say, sit, Mom, I'll take care of it. Not because I was weak, but because I was loved. That first sip was more than thirst. It was survival. It was a private declaration. I can still do this. But it came with an ache that wasn't from my bruises. It came from the quiet realization that I've been surviving for years without anyone really noticing. People see strength and assume you have no need, but sometimes strength is born from being ignored, from learning to carry yourself because no one else thought to reach for your hand. I thought of the many glasses of water I'd poured for them, when they had fevers, when they woke crying, when they were tired, sick, disappointed, how instinctively I'd moved without being asked, without needing thanks. And I didn't resent it. No, that's not what this is. I would do it all again. Every late night, every quiet sacrifice. I only wish it had taught them how to pour for someone else. After the water, I opened a cupboard and found crackers, dry, stale, but safe. I sat in the corner of the kitchen and nibbled slowly crumbs, catching in the folds of the blanket still wrapped around me. It felt almost ceremonial, this small meal, like communion, like I was feeding not just my body but my memory, remembering what it felt like to be cared for if only by myself. I looked at the stove, cold, silent, once the heart of my world. I used to stand at that stove like it was a stage spinning stories, with every stir of the pot. The smell of garlic, of broth, of browned butter. They were the smells of my love language. I cooked so often that the wooden spoon fit my hand like a glove. But it's been a long time since anyone walked in and said, what's cooking, Mom, now? I mostly eat in silence. Meals for one, sometimes toast and tea, sometimes nothing. Strange how emptiness becomes a routine. That night I watched the shadows dance across the linoleum. The moonlight flickered against the old fridge magnets. One of them, shaped like a cat, used to hold up drawings. Now it held a bill I hadn't yet opened. I used to live for noise, for motion, for the chaos of family life. The sink overflowing with dishes, the clatter of shoes kicked off in the hallway, the laughter echoing down the stairs. Even the arguments, I miss those too. At least they meant I was still part of something. At least they meant I mattered enough to be disagreed with. Now everything is quiet, neat, predictable, and so very, very lonely. The phone still hadn't rung, not even a text. I used to think that if I ever truly needed them, they would come, that despite the distance and the busy schedules, there was a thread that would tug soft but undeniable at their hearts, that they would feel it, that something inside them would stop and say, "Call her, now." But the thread, if it ever existed, had gone slack. I thought about calling them myself. I truly did. I even imagined what I'd say, how I'd laugh it off, silly me. I slipped, but I'm okay now. I'd hide the truth. I'd make it easy for them again. I'd spare them the guilt, because that's what I've always done. But something inside me said no. Not this time. Because if I called now, they'd never know what it meant that they hadn't called first. They'd never know what it cost me to lie on that floor, waiting. They'd never know the silence, the aching hours, the absence that settled in my bones. And I didn't want to protect them from that anymore. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. Because sometimes love is not another bowl of soup. Sometimes love is silence. Sometimes love is stepping back and saying, "If you don't see me now, maybe you never really did." It was dusk on the third day when the phone finally rang. I heard it from the kitchen, that familiar chime echoing faintly down the hallway, like a voice from another life. For a moment, I froze. My hand still hovered over the sink where I'd been slowly rinsing a single spoon I'd used to stir instant coffee. The sound was so alien, so unexpected, that it felt almost ghostly, like something that didn't belong in the still world I'd been living in, a sound I had stopped believing would ever come. I didn't rush. I didn't limp to it with hope swelling in my chest. I didn't even answer right away. I just stood there listening to it ring, again and again and again, until it stopped. Then silence. A few minutes later it rang again, and only then did I begin the slow walk toward it, each step a conversation with my own disappointment. Don't get your hopes up. It might just be a reminder call, a spam number, a check-in without real checking in. But part of me foolishly, stubbornly, still wanted it to be one of them, still wanted that thread to be real. I picked up the phone and looked at the screen. It was my daughter. And just like that, I felt both everything and nothing. I answered. Her voice was bright, breezy. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How are you?" I didn't know what to say, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready to pretend. I wasn't ready to slip into the old dance to answer her with sugar and softness and brush off the quiet scream that had lived in my body for 3 days. I said, "I'm here." She laughed, distracted. Good, good. Sorry I didn't call sooner. Things have been, just non-stop. You know how it is." No, I didn't. I didn't know how it was, not anymore. She kept talking. Work the kids a funny story about a spilled smoothie. I stood there with the phone pressed to my cheek and realized she hadn't noticed. Not the difference in my voice, not the pauses, not the thinness behind my words. She didn't ask how I was really doing. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She didn't ask if I'd fallen. She didn't notice anything at all. And so I didn't tell her. I let her speak. I gave her the space I always do. I answered where I had to, murmured small affirmations, let her believe I was still the same. Because what would it change? If I told her I fell, and I waited for you, she would apologize. She would feel guilty. She would cry. Maybe she'd promise to do better. And then life would sweep her back up again. The world would get loud and I would grow quiet again. What I needed wasn't guilt. What I needed was awareness. And she didn't have it. When we hung up, she said, "Love you, Mom," the way people say it before signing off a grocery list. Habit. ritual, something said more out of rhythm than meaning. I said I love you too because I do. I always will. But I said it slowly, deliberately, as if to remind myself that love and hurt often share a spine. Afterward, I sat back down in my chair and looked out the window. The light had gone soft and blue, the kind of light that makes everything look a little more honest. I watched the street outside, empty, quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't wait for answers. That's when it settled in me, not just the sadness, but the decision. I wouldn't keep waiting like this. Not for calls, not for visits, not for recognition wrapped in convenience. I wouldn't keep teaching them that I was someone who would always answer, always smile, always fold my needs smaller to fit inside their comfort. The call had come, and it changed nothing. After she hung up, the silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in the 3 days before. Heavier than the fall, heavier than the hunger, heavier than the long, aching drag across the floor. Because this time the silence wasn't from absence. It was from awareness, the kind that doesn't leave room for excuses anymore. I sat there and stared at the phone still lit up with the last trace of her name. That name that used to mean everything. That name I whispered when she was born, cradling her in arms that hadn't yet known the weight of being invisible. She had no idea, not a clue. She didn't hear it in my voice, didn't pause to ask why I wasn't filling the conversation with warmth like I usually do. She didn't even notice how short my answers were, and it struck me how little I had allowed her to know me. Not the me that laughs at her stories or bakes her favorite bread, but the me that aches in her bones, that waits by the window, that folds her pain into silence. And in that moment, I felt something unfamiliar: distance. Not the physical kind, not miles or travel time, but emotional distance. The kind that creeps in when you finally see a person for who they are and who they no longer are. I didn't feel betrayed. I didn't feel angry. I felt released. I looked around the room at the half-drawn curtains, the flicker of the television I'd left on without sound, the book lying open beside my untouched tea, and I realized I had been building my days around the hope of being remembered. Every call I made, every meal I prepared, just in case someone stopped by, every little text I sent, always cheerful, always forgiving, every gift wrapped with too much care. It was all a kind of reaching, a silent asking. Do you still see me? Do I still matter to you? And they answered me not with words, but with forgetting. When they did remember, it was on their terms, in rushed calls between meetings, in texts that started with, "Sorry, I've been MIA," in holiday visits where they stared at their phones more than at my eyes. I had been the background music of their lives, the quiet hum they no longer noticed. But I remember every detail of them. I remember my son's tiny hands clutching my sleeve when he had a nightmare. I remember the way my daughter used to sing nonsense songs in the bath, her hair slicked back like a mermaid. I remember the exact way they cried when they didn't know I was watching. I remember holding them, feeding them, shaping every inch of who they became. And now they barely remember to call. It's a wound that doesn't bleed. It just pulses softly, endlessly beneath everything. But something happened after that phone call. Not a loud epiphany, not a snap or a scream, just quiet certainty, a shift in posture, a different way of holding myself. I made a promise not to them, but to myself. I would stop making it so easy for them to forget me. I would stop saying it's okay when it isn't. I would stop cushioning their neglect with my softness. I would answer less. I would offer less, not to punish, but to protect. Because my heart is not a doormat, and my time, what little remains, is not something to be spent waiting by the phone. I've earned more than this. More than being the last call on a long list. More than being the afterthought of a too busy day. More than being the woman who folds her hurt into small, polite shapes so it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. I used to think my value came from being there, from being available, from being needed. But now I know I deserve to be wanted too, not out of obligation, but out of love. And if they don't remember me until I stop showing up, then maybe it's time I stop. That night I sat by the window in the living room, the one that overlooks the street, with the old sycamore tree, and I let the darkness settle around me without rushing to turn on a light. The quiet no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a companion, a mirror, a kind of witness to the part of me that had always been there just beneath the surface, the part that was tired of waiting, tired of smiling, tired of shrinking to fit inside the lines other people had drawn. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, not out of cold, but out of habit, a gesture I'd made my entire life, always wrapping myself in something: responsibility, patience, silence. Now it was just fabric, but it still carried the shape of all the years I'd used it to cover what I didn't say. The house was so still. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind against the glass seemed to breathe with me. I realized I hadn't spoken aloud in hours, not a single word, since that phone call. It was strange how quickly my voice could vanish when no one needed to hear it. And yet I didn't feel voiceless. For the first time in a long while, I felt honest. I didn't want to lie anymore. Not to them, not to myself. I used to make excuses. They're busy. They don't mean to forget. They'll come when it really matters. But the truth is, I'd made it too easy for them not to come. Too easy to assume I would always be there, quietly holding everything together, always saying yes, always making space. And I began to think maybe it's time to stop making space for those who don't look for it. The next morning I got up slowly. My body ached, but something inside me felt different. I moved through the house with intention, not the mechanical movement of routine, but something smaller, quieter. I started with the living room shelves. I took down framed photos, not out of spite, but to make room for something else. I don't know what yet, but I knew the walls didn't need to hold a shrine to people who had forgotten how to visit. I moved to the kitchen next. I opened the drawer where I kept the good silverware, the ones I never used, unless someone came over. And I took out one spoon, just one. I placed it in the sink and thought, from now on I cook for myself first. I cleared out the fridge, tossing the old things I'd been saving just in case. The leftovers no one would come by to eat. The snacks I kept for when the grandkids dropped in. They didn't drop in anymore, and the food was starting to look like promises no one had made. Then I stood at the calendar. I took it off the wall. No more empty boxes staring back at me. No more waiting for someone else to make a mark. I threw it away, not in anger, but with calm hands. I didn't need a calendar to measure days I was supposed to feel forgotten. I didn't need reminders to call people who never called me. What I needed was a different kind of rhythm, one that didn't revolve around hoping. I made a cup of tea, sat in the quiet, and I began to make a list not of chores or errands, but of the things I hadn't done in years. Simple things, things that were mine. Read poetry again. Walk to the garden, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Listen to music with the windows open. Write a letter to no one in particular. It was a list of remembrance, but this time remembering myself. Because if they couldn't remember me, I would. I would become visible again. To myself. In the days that followed, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I stopped answering right away. When the phone rang, I let it. I watched it glow on the table, pulsing softly like a heartbeat, and I didn't move. Not out of anger, but out of something else, something steadier. I wanted to see how long they would wait, if they would call again, if they would notice the silence. And when I did answer later on my time, I didn't fill the air with reassurances. I didn't ask questions to make them feel important. I listened. I responded. But I stopped performing. The quiet smile, the endless forgiveness, the warmth I gave so easily. I kept some of it for myself now. At first they didn't notice. They thought I was tired, busy, distracted, and maybe I was, but not in the way they assumed. I wasn't distracted by errands or chores or television. I was distracted by the work of reclaiming myself. I started going through drawers once filled with old birthday cards, faded receipts, little notes they'd scribbled in childhood. Some made me smile. Some made me cry. But more than anything, they reminded me that I had once been central to someone's world, that there was a time when I was not just loved, but needed. And I realized I don't need to be needed anymore. I need to be valued, seen, held in memory with care, not convenience. I began changing things in small ways. I rearranged the living room. I donated the dusty toys no one played with. I took the guest towels out of the linen closet and used them myself. No more saving the softest things for people who didn't come. I started buying fruit I liked, not what I thought the grandkids would eat. I began humming again in the kitchen. Sometimes I danced slowly barefoot in the quiet hum of my own presence. The floor still creaked under my steps, but it didn't frighten me anymore. It made me feel alive. I cooked meals for myself with as much care as I had once cooked for them. I used the nice plates. I sat at the table. I lit a candle one evening just for me. I didn't take a photo. I didn't share it. It wasn't for anyone else to notice. It was for me. A small, quiet act of remembrance. I had spent so many years building a life around others, anticipating their needs, softening their discomforts, cushioning their mistakes. I had erased myself with good intentions, with love, with the kind of devotion that mothers wear like a second skin. But now I was peeling that skin back. Not shedding love, but shedding the silence that had made it one-sided. I still love them, fiercely, unshakably. But love doesn't mean waiting by the phone. Love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be hurt again and again under the banner of understanding. And so I made a quiet vow spoken only to the flicker of the candlelight on my kitchen table. I will not make myself small for people who only remember me when it's easy. I will not keep forgiving forgetfulness just because I taught them how to forget me. I will be kind, but I will also be visible. And if I am only remembered in the silence I leave behind, then so be it. I finished my tea. I washed my plate. I folded the blanket on the arm of the chair. And when the phone rang again, I let it ring. I wasn't angry. I was just elsewhere now. Somewhere softer, somewhere mine.